So let's give a warm welcome to Daniela Petrova.
Thank you all for coming.
Well, thank you for taking time. We're going to hear more about her busy schedule, which sounds busy. So I thought we'd talk a little bit about the novel without any spoilers, and then move on to questions about Daniela's journey to publication. The novel tells the story of 29-year-old Lana Stone, who's an art curator at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, as she faces her last chance of having a baby with the help of an egg donor after struggling with infertility for years. 3 days before the scheduled transfer, Tyler, Lana's partner, moves out, leaving Lana heartbroken. She decides to proceed with the transfer on her own and becomes pregnant without Tyler's knowledge. A week later, while riding the subway, Lana recognizes her baby's anonymous egg donor, beautiful, vivacious, 21-year-old Columbia University student, Tania Moore. Lana recognizes her from Katya's photo in her egg donor profile, and Lana approaches Katya, with whom she shares a Bulgarian heritage, and the two develop an intense, if risky, friendship. When Katya suddenly goes missing, Lana realizes that she was probably the last person to see her. This multi-layered thriller unravels the mystery of what happened to Katya as it explores important ethical, moral, legal, and emotional questions raised by having a baby through an egg donor. So, in addition to being a gripping thriller, the book explores issues relating to reproductive rights, which are topical and very relevant today. I'm curious why you chose this topic as a central theme of your book.
I didn't. One of the things I learned in the many classes I've taken in the past 2 decades, writing classes, was not to start with a theme. That's something that should emerge later. And another thing I had learned in my writing classes was to write about something you know, and to write what nobody else, to write the story nobody else can tell. And I didn't follow this advice with my first book I wrote, which is dead now because it needs to be dead. It was terrible. And it was a book about sex trafficking in Kosovo, and I knew absolutely nothing about that. And actually I was a member of this workshop of the Columbia Fiction Foundry, and I was here one day when we had 2 agents critique our query letters, and I realized how bad that first novel was, and it wasn't working. And when I started working on this one, I basically thought about what I had been going through in the past decade. In my 30s, my husband at the time and I had gone through infertility and tried numerous fertility treatments, including donor egg cycle. And I thought, what if a woman who's pregnant from a donor egg cycle encounters her donor on the subway? And I thought, would she start following her, right? I mean, hungry to find out more about this woman whose genes her baby would inherit, and what would happen then if the young woman, the donor, disappears. And so it started out as a mystery, and while the mystery is the engine that drives the story, it's really a story about relationships, relationships about romantic partners, but also mother-daughter relationships between friends, between therapists and their patients. And so while I worked on the novel, I really didn't think about a theme. Infertility was just something in the background that starts off the story, and it was something I knew a lot about. So it was much easier than with that previous novel where I had to do all this research, and I still couldn't possibly know what it's like to be in a Kosovo brothel. So this was much easier. I knew what it was like to give yourself injections and all these things.
And those parts of it were absolutely fascinating, and I think it's a really central part of the book for those of us who don't know about anything about it. But what I also have to commend you for is that maybe you didn't start with the theme, you started with the relationships, but I think sometimes people can get, it can stop there.
Right.
You know, that, and you really have this very driving, strong narrative arc, you know, of stuff that happens and mysteries and urgency and things we want to find out.
Thank you. I'm so glad to hear that.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, listen, Crime Reads wouldn't have called it one of the most anticipated books of the year if it didn't have that. So the other interesting choice you made is the story is written in alternating points of view between Lana, Tyler, and Katja. And I'm curious why you chose this technique. It certainly enhances suspense, but I'm wondering what else it allowed you to do. And I'm curious how you sort of connected that to the plot arc, because you do it really well, but that adds a very complicating element in terms of your pacing and plot development.
It was very complicated. I have to say, I spent more time revising and trying to figure out, once you move one chapter, the whole line of dominoes fall. So it was very complicated. But I wrote the first draft in a third person point of view. And I wrote myself into a corner. I did not know how to resolve the story. And I put the book down for a few years while I was going through some personal issues. And when I picked up the book again, a couple of years later, maybe 3 years later, I thought that I should give voice to the three main characters and let them tell their own story, because I had experience going through infertility, and I had no idea what it's like for the donor. I had never asked myself the question, how does a donor feel who donates her eggs? How does the male partner or the husband feels? And so once I started writing from first person point of view, it really opened up. Basically, the characters took the story into their own hands, and I kind of followed. And it allowed me to resolve the story and arrive to that conclusion in the book. So it was very helpful, but I was quite worried at first if I will be able to pull off three distinct voices, especially between the two women. But I was quite surprised by the voice of Katja. Her voice came out very powerful, and she turned out to be a very different character than I had imagined earlier on. I mean, she took her fate in her own hands. So, yeah. Yeah, that's interesting to hear you say that, because, and maybe, I'm a little bit surprised to hear that you were worried about Katja and Lana being different, because they're very different. Right.
And Katja, without giving away too much about her story, has sides to her that are more enigmatic. And not to say that she's a villain, but sometimes it can actually, I just find it can actually be easier and more fun to write characters who are quite different from us. And I'm just curious, writing villains is a lot of fun. Not that she's a villain, but I'm curious, how many of you are writers out there? Everyone. Awesome. That's great. And how many of you enjoy writing villains? Some of you, not everyone. Some. Okay, well, I don't know what that says about me. I love writing villains. And Katja's not a villain, but she definitely is more different in some ways.
Right. She's not the innocent victim. Just say.
Right. Well, yeah. Okay. She's an interesting character, and I was curious in choosing to write from a male perspective. You're engaging with the question of gender identity politics that has changed the landscape for fiction writers and made it more complicated. Writers have to navigate the gray zone between writing what we know, which ultimately could be limiting. I mean, it's true, you don't, that how far out do you go, and if you stay totally with what you know, it could be, could become very repetitive.
Right.
And giving voice to a broad range of perspectives without being transgressive. So I was wondering whether you were at all nervous about writing from a male perspective and what kind of feedback you've gotten on that, because that's certainly the most, in some ways, different.
Right. I was a little worried if I will be able to have the male voice, if that would come to me. But I was quite pleased with the results. I didn't find it more difficult to write. and readers' reactions have been very positive, especially in terms of showing the male perspective in this very difficult, emotionally fraught experience that infertility can be. And readers have commented on the fact that I have presented him in a positive light, and I have been able to express what it feels like to a man to go through this experience.
Oh, that's great that you got that feedback from men, because certainly not being a man myself, I did find it really valuable to see all these different sides of it, you know, to hear. And one of the great things about fiction is that it can explore complex material through a personal lens. Studies have shown that reading fiction, and I'm sure writing it, enhances people's empathy. And this may be a topic that we've read about from a scientific perspective or in the news or whatever, ethical, but you bring it to life through the relationships and people's feelings and how it actually impacts them, you know, in their relationships and lives, which was, I found it riveting, you know. So I'm glad to hear you got a positive response to that, because certainly I thought it was really valuable to hear that perspective and give voice to the men going through this.